Most of us recognise Jerry from Gardening Australia. He would be no stranger to any of us. But let's remember he also has other roles in gardening and conservation, including being patron of the National Toxics Network. Today, Jerry is joining us as the director of the Seed Savers Network, and this is a role that he's chaired and held for 15 years. This is a grassroots community network which was founded by Jude and Michelle Fanton in the Northern Rivers region of New South Wales back in 1986. So without further ado, I would just like to throw towards our special guest presenter. Thank you very much, and welcome Jerry Coleby-Williams.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome. I feel like I'm addressing the future of talkback radio in doing this, because it is a little bit more personal, and we do actually feel a little bit more engaged by doing this. So as you can see, I'm wearing my Seed Savers hat today, and I think probably the best way to start this off is that since we've had this social distancing, suddenly people have been interested in gardening. And in the warm-up leading up to this session, I was just saying how for many years we've been talking about the importance of seed saving. Most of us have done some seed saving at home, but it's only just suddenly entered the public mind that in fact it might actually be useful and that there are direct benefits from doing it. And so the first reason I would suggest people become seed savers is this jar here. In this jar, I've got Mizuna seed, and I've probably got enough seed to feed the entire suburb of Wynnum if they wanted to eat healthily. But the main point about this is that this is bottled confidence for an amateur gardener. Now, if you think about buying a packet of seed from a normal commercial outlet, if you get a hybrid, you may only get 20 or 30 individual seed in a packet. And if you don't get 20 or 30 plants as a result, you automatically assume that it's something that you've done wrong, that you are at fault as a gardener. I know I do, and I've been through that experience before. But look, you know, if you've got 500,000 seed here, does it really matter if a couple of thousand fail? Suddenly, you can do things that you wouldn't otherwise do. You can do broadacre sowing. This is how we sow seed of everlastings when I worked at Mount Annan Botanic Garden in New South Wales. And it's really cheap. So confidence is one of the reasons. The other one is the fact that you have seed which you can share. And that is a very important thing. I mean, I've been trying to live and garden sustainably here in Brisbane since 2003. And one of the things that everybody asks about is money. This is a cashless form of trading. I have a list of surplus seed that I've produced from this year, and it is surplus to all my dreams and needs, but it has a dollar value. And so I can trade that seed with other people that may have things that I don't have or I wish to have. And so it has it's a commodity. It is of value. Now, in my garden, I don't have any chickens. I don't have an avocado tree, but I'm never without access to eggs or avocados in season because I grow a surplus. I grow a surplus of plants, I have a surplus of jams, and I have a surplus of seed. And that is a very important thing for me as somebody that lives on a median income. So there is cash to be had in it. Now, Jude and Michelle Fanton set up the Seed Savers Network in 1986 for very different reasons. They wanted to make people independent and free of the multinationals that control the majority of seed which is produced on planet Earth. There's probably about 5 multinationals now which produce about 80% of the seed that people grow. So there is great dominance in the sources of seed that you have. Now, I haven't got my screen done properly, but now I've raised the screen. At the top, just above me, is a picture of my great-granddad, William Coleby, who was a market gardener and a seed saver. When he was gardening in England in the 1800s, he had access to dozens and dozens of locally adapted varieties of crop. So he wouldn't have been waving just a general type of Mizuna. He would have been waving a jar of Mizuna saved from his seed, from his crop in East England, which was adapted to the climate and soils of East England. Now, there was a seed crisis during the Second World War, and a lot of seed was transported across from the United States to England to try and fill the need so that people could grow crops and feed themselves. One of the difficulties they found then with that imported seed was that to a large extent, it had become localized, adapted to the soils and conditions of continental America, which were very different from the climate of England. And so in the first few generations of using that seed that had been sent over, they had very bad results. It affected the success of the crops that people were growing. And that message is still there today. If you buy commercial seed, if it was from an Australian seed supplier, it's likely to be somebody that's bought seed from overseas and then it's repackaged and resold. The advantage of saving your own seed is the fact that you can localize your crops to suit your soils and conditions. So, for example, if you buy a packet of coriander seed and it comes from one Australian supplier, its results will be different if you sow it in warm temperate Sydney, dry temperate Perth, cool temperate Hobart, or subtropical Brisbane. And the gardeners there will be thinking that it's their fault that they haven't had 100% success with it. They won't have realized that the source of the seed has predisposed that seed to growing in its localized conditions. So one of the buzzwords of seed saving today is localization. My great-grandfather had access to a wide variety of crops which no longer exist. Weird things like the crown pea, a garden pea which only produced pods on the top of the plant at just the right height for hand picking because people used manual labour in those days. So it was convenient for hand picking. He would have had access to plants which produce crops over extended periods of time. Modern farming has produced crops which are ready to go to market in one go. Now that is wonderful for a mechanised farm, for somebody that wants to clear their field, get their crop in at a premium time, get a premium price, whiz it off to the market, and then start with the next crop. It's really good for that sort of systematized way of production. But in a home food garden, that's not what you want. You don't really want to have, for example, a wheelbarrow full of celery one week and nothing to eat the next. What you really want are some of the old-fashioned varieties that produce crops over an extended period of time. And that's one of the reasons why Seed Savers advocates localization, saving seed from your own crops year in, year out, so that it adapts to your local soils and conditions. And as it does so, those localized cultivars are essentially your own genetic property. They are better able to cope with your local soils and conditions. Now, this takes me on to the next reason why Jude and Michelle set up the Seed Savers Network. They did have a centralized seed bank and they got rid of it. It's all been dispersed amongst our Seed Saver local networks. We have about 100 spread around Australia, and each now maintains their own seed bank. The reason we did that was because it's important to have access to locally adapted plants in your local area. It's also important that those seed banks don't hold on to the seed forever. And that was the risk that was happening with one centralized seed bank. Seed was being stored for a long time. Now, if you think about it, that's probably replicating what is going on in the Doomsday Vault in Svalbard, in the Spitsbergen Islands. They have a reserve, an emergency reserve of seed of all the valuable plants that they think are valuable to humanity, stored there in perpetuity. Now, this raises a number of issues which saving seed at home is aimed to avoid. Firstly, you can't save seed of certain plants. Now I've got here some seed of Jubea chilensis. This is a miniature coconut. It's a palm, and most palms produce their seed exactly at the right time for them to be sprouted and germinated. They don't build in a delay. They're not ideal for saving. In fact, sometimes seed can be so wet that drying it will kill the embryo, freezing it will split the embryo, and you won't get anything resulting from it. So automatically, long-term seed storage is not useful for the home gardener. The other problem with long-term seed storage is that it doesn't do anything about the pollinators that may need to be in place for producing the seed. Some plants are wind pollinated, so they're not particularly a great issue. But if you have a special relationship between a plant and a pollinator, you have to conserve the pollinator as well. And the best way to save the pollinator and the plant it pollinates is actually in the wild. So that's active conservation in a living situation rather than putting things into a fridge and storing it. So you can't save the pollinators of crops. The other thing that you can't save are the mycorrhizal fungi which live in association with those plants. Now, some of you may have grown legumes, and this is some saved pigeon seed here, pigeon pea seed. This is a legume which I use for protein. It's also a wonderful bait for native bees when it flowers. They're flowering in my garden at the moment, and I've got bee heaven about 2 meters above my head. The problem with these is that they really need to be inoculated with the right type of mycorrhizal fungus to make sure that they can get nitrogen from the atmosphere in their roots and fix that as nitrates. It also helps them to grow more efficiently and effectively, makes them more drought tolerant, more disease resistant. There's a whole reason why mycorrhizal fungi at the roots are vital for plant and crop health. Unfortunately, you can't save those. So that's another reason why we don't like the idea of saving in perpetuity. Seed Savers believes that you should only save seed for as long as the seed will remain viable at the temperature that you would find in your fridge, which is around 4 degrees Celsius. So something between 3 and 10 years, depending upon the crop that you're saving. And at the end of that time, it's important to sow the seed, and this pigeon pea is an example of something which is now at its sow-by date. And when you sow them, you produce more seed, and then you bank that seed again. So you've got viable seed, it's kept within reach, and you're able to inoculate them. Now with this seed, when I give away or sell pigeon pea seed, I take soil from the roots, which will contain the mycorrhizal fungi. I sprinkle a little bit of that over the seed when it's been cleaned and dried. That goes into the packaging, and that gets out to the person that's going to grow them, so they have inoculated seed. That's not something that you'll find happening in an official seed bank. The other problem is saving seed of crops puts them into one place. And that's one reason why we didn't want to have a national seed bank in Byron Bay. If there'd been a house fire, it would all gone. So by repatriating our seed to all the local seed networks around the country, we've spread our risks. If you think back to the situation that the world has just gone through with the ongoing conflict in Syria, Syria is one of the places where the United Nations decided to store 1/3 of all of the different varieties of chickpea that exist, and they were banked there. The idea was to repatriate them to a point of origin where they could be cared for by the local people. But of course, the war there has destroyed the seed bank, and the majority of the seed has been lost. Now, this is an example of how risky it can be, because chickpea is not just a very valuable legume. It's extinct in the wild, so you can't conserve it in the wild. The diversity that exists only in seed banks, and 1/3 of that diversity was in Syria, and that has now been lost. you can't recreate that genetic diversity once it's gone. So the idea of having a local seed network spread across Australia is one way that we can make sure that not only can you have locally adapted varieties of crops, but you've also got local access, and you've spread the risk of losing something of great value to humanity if disaster strikes. Now, I say if disaster strikes, look, I set up my house and garden to be a sustainable project. But one of the things that you can't foresee is the unforeseen. And I didn't foresee coronavirus losing 85% of my work in the space of a week. There are a lot of other things that you cannot plan for. And that's why it's important that you have seed saving as part of your practice as a gardener. Now, some things can be fun to grow. This is a pandanus. This is Pandanus cookii. I've got a plant growing in my front garden. You can bake these, you can roast them. The flesh is quite nice. You can cook the flesh in sweetened water. I often put pandan in with these, so it's a sort of a fruit. But it's a really interesting seed because this cannot be saved either. It can't be frozen, it can't be dried. You just leave this out in the garden. And eventually, in about 18 months' time, you'll end up with something sprouting like this. And if you look closely, you can see I've actually got multiple plants here in this pot. This is polyembryonic. It produces sister clones. So you can have a little bit of fun with growing this particular plant. So it's a food plant, it's a shade plant. It's a source of pollen for bees. It's an ornamental. And it is something which you can produce at home, but you can't actually save the seed in a conventional way. Just here, I have a lovely little plant here. This is Talinum. It would be flowering now, but I brought it indoors, so it's closed its flowers because it thinks it's night. This is a leaf vegetable, rather like portulaca, purslane. So these leaves are something which you would steam very lightly. You put it into a salad. If I cook it or steam it, I use this with a lemon or lime juice based dressing in a salad. It goes very well with tofu and tempeh and chicken and fish and all that sort of thing. And it's a lovely little plant. It's very easy to save the seed as long as you catch it. These little pods here are explosive. And so you need to put something around the seed in order to make sure that it doesn't explode all around and you can actually gather the seed up. It's very, very small, like poppy seed. So to save the seed of that, I use pantyhose. And this pantyhose is really useful. I mean, I'm never without pantyhose in my garden because it's one of the best ties that you can have for something soft like a tomato. It's got a lovely stretch in it so it doesn't cut the stems. But more importantly in this use, it allows air to move through. So if you do get rain, then the seed inside can breathe, it will dry out, and it captures exploding seed pods. And there's a lot of legumes which will do this. Pigeon peas, for example, will reach a point when suddenly all the seed will start to burst and you lose half your crop. But of course, that's one of the things you learn as you go along. I should at this stage say that I know you spent an enormous amount of money on joining me here, and I do appreciate the value that you place on my advice. But to make things really simple, the Seed Savers Network has got a Seed Savers Manual. This covers the techniques for saving seed and maintaining the vigour of over 130 different crops in your garden. So it's not quite enough to keep my garden going, so I generally aim for a little bit more than that. But for the average gardener, this is more than you're ever really going to want. So there's all sorts of tips inside here about how to not only save the seed, how long the seed will be able to be saved, and various other tricks that you need to know. If you can't afford this, you can get a free PDF version of this, which you can print. So all you really need to know is Seed Savers Network. The Australian Seed Savers Network has its own website, so it's www.seedsavers.net. You can find the menu for this. And that is basically the kit that you need to become a serious self-sufficient seed saver. Now, if you wanted to go a little bit further and maybe save seed in a school or a community garden, we've actually got this little manual, Seed to Seed Food Gardens, which gives you the complete growing cycle with lessons that you can learn and lessons that can be taught either to gardeners or to school groups. Again, you can pay money to get a copy of this in the post, or you can download the PDF free. That's one of the reasons why I love the Seed Savers, because one of the things that we did foresee was if there is an economic crisis, there may be lots of people wanting to garden, but they don't actually have ready cash. And we seem to have got that one right this time. There's also another publication, the Local Seed Saver Network. It's a manual for establishing your own organisation. Generally, we recommend it takes about 30 people to make a local seed network really vibrant. If you have many more than that, it can make it difficult finding a place to meet, and it can make meetings quite complicated to organise. But around about 30, you can fit those in the average back garden, and you can have a meeting quite successfully. But all the information in here is mostly about the curation, if I can use that word, of seed. How you can make sure that plants don't become inbred, that they don't lose their vigour. It gives you an idea of how to test the viability of seed and the sort of results you should be getting. There's various high-end information in this particular manual, and that allows groups to become independent of us. And again, you can pay cash or you can print this for free from the Seed Savers Network. Now, what does it take to set up a seed bank? If you're just doing it casually, well, you don't really need much more than these jars here. You see the Mizuna here, this is coriander. I do like these little spice jars because they're quite narrow and they occupy a small footprint, so you can put these into the side of your fridge, into the door, and all you need to do is to mark on the outside what's in it, and that could actually be a really good impromptu seed bank. What I like to do is, because my life is a little bit more complicated because of my role, but this is my the heart of my seed store. This sits in my fridge permanently, and every 3 months I get out all my seed, I write a list, and I check the dates that I save them and whether I need to germinate the seed, grow a new crop, and either get rid of it or eat it, or save another batch of seed and it goes back into the seed bank. And that system operated really well until I became a director of the Seed Savers Network. And now I try to aim as much as I can to produce a surplus of seed from my best crops. And that takes me to a very simple seed saving technique. You never eat your best plants. Those are the ones that you save for seed. They're your mother's stock. You eat the rest, but you never eat your best plants. You use those because you want to keep your seed vibrant. This is a kaffir lime. It's a citrus. And I get a lot of inquiries about saving the seed of these because, you see, as soon as citrus seed is ripe, it's ready to germinate. It can't be frozen, it can't be chilled, it can't be dried. It has to be sown directly. And the more the seed dries out, the less viable it becomes. So this particular plant is a species. It's Citrus hystrix. It's a wild citrus. So you can save the seed from this and sow them directly. You can't bank them, but you can guarantee that the offspring will resemble the parent. The important thing about citrus is that we've only just recently, in probably about the last 3 years, worked out the DNA tree map of the evolution of the citrus which we grow today. And the majority of the citrus that we grow today are hybrids. So lemon, for example, lemon is a hybrid. It has 2 separate parents. So when you sow the seed, you can't guarantee that the offspring will resemble the parents in the same way that this simple species will do. They may resemble one parent or the other, or neither. There's a gamble. So when it comes to saving the seed of citrus and getting what you want, you have to work with things which haven't been heavily hybridized. So, for example, this is one. Pomelo is another one of the citrus which hasn't been heavily hybridized. Bush lemons are fine because they're not particularly heavily hybridized. But don't expect something like an orange to come true to type, because they won't come true to type. True to type is part of the jargon of seed saving, and it really means they resemble their parents. But look, when it comes to saving seed of your best plants, you have to be the judge of what really is the best source of seed for next year. That may vary according to what you like, but some suggestions. For example, if you're saving seed of lettuce, you don't want to save seed from the first plant that produces flowers and seed. It's better to go for one which produces seed at the end. The idea of that is that the one which is the least likely to go to seed gives you the longest possible picking period. Correspondingly, if you want to save seed of kale, one of my favourite kales is Red Russian. And I like that because it performs in bitterly cold climates, and it also grows well here in the subtropics. As a crop variety goes, it's got this enormous range of climates that it will cope with. The other reason I like it is because there is a bit of variability in the offspring. So it's possible to choose some which have less delicately cut leaf, and some which can look almost as delicate as curly parsley. So you can personalize some of the varieties that you have. And while it may not give you any particular cutting edge on your local soils and conditions, it may not increase the reliability of your crops, it's certainly cute. And you can't discount the joy of creating your own cultivars at home. If you have a look at my seed list, I've got Daigai Choi, which I called Wynnum Imperial, after the suburb where I live in Wynnum. And that just spontaneously came up in a batch of Daigai Choi. And it was a beautifully curly leaf variety. And it came true to type. So the next generation of seed I sowed all came up curly, which is quite unusual. Sometimes you may have to sow it and select and select and select over several generations to get the variety distinct to your wishes. But with old Wynnum Imperial, it just came up trumps right from the start. Another variety that I'm producing is a mustard, which has a beautiful curly leaf again. But this one is taking some time, so it's probably going to be about 5, 6, 7 generations before it stabilizes. But look, 5 or 6 generations generally is the amount of time it takes to localize a variety from a different climate zone. And that's just an average sort of statistic that I can give you. So if you are buying something which has come from a different climate zone and it doesn't perform very well in the first year, hang in and keep saving seed from your best plants, and you'll find they'll slowly improve in their performance. I had this example when I was buying seed from Phoenix Seeds, which no longer trades, in Snug in Tasmania. And they had Chinese celery available. And I thought, well, I'll give that a go because it's perennial celery. So there's no risk of getting a wheelbarrow full of celery every week. It's something which reproduces every single month of the year. So you have small sticks of celery, very flavoursome, all year round. But it's a cool temperate plant. And the issue with it being a cool temperate plant is that up here in the subtropics, it doesn't like our warm, wet, humid summers. So I only got about half a dozen seed from an entire batch of this celery after my first year. And the results from those plants were really quite spindly for the first year, But by year 3, they were looking sad at the end of subtropical summer, but they weren't dead. And they started to produce seed. And by year 5, they were growing perfectly well. In fact, they were self-seeding in my back garden. So I'd achieved one of the goals of seed saving. I'd managed to locally adapt a cool temperate crop to the subtropics. I'd been able to produce food all year round from that plant. It was just exactly what I was looking for. And by self-seeding in my garden, each year it was successively getting more and more adapted to my climate. Now, this is the closer for my presentation, because when you're looking at how we can modify our crops to better suit a changing climate, we can look at what farmers are doing, and farmers are buying all their seed from a single source, from a single climate zone, and sowing that around the country, which is inherently risky. Or you could go the seed savers way, and you could produce hundreds and thousands of locally adapted varieties of crops, and you save their seed every single year. The major advantage of local seed saving is that as our climate changes, so too does the adaptability and the resilience of the seed that we're growing. It's one of the few areas I can think of where a home gardener can be up to speed with climate change and has a greater chance of succeeding in sowing their crops, whatever the weather. And the more seed, the more varieties that you grow, that diversity in those plants inherently gives you the cutting edge over an industrial monoculture, because there will always be winners and losers. We cannot control the weather. We cannot control the seasons. But one of the things that we can do is spreading the risks of having no one centralized source of seed and making sure that we adapt crops to suit our local soils and conditions. Now, I've noticed there's a couple of questions that have come up down here in the dialogue. David Bagley to everyone, do you have seeds for sale, Jerry? Well, funnily enough, I do. I showed you my actual seed store. This is my seed to hand. This is my surplus seed to hand. I normally have my open day on Mother's Day weekend, but it's not going to happen this year. But I still produce the seed anyway, because what else are you going to do? It could come in handy. I've got about 600 packets of about 32 different varieties of surplus seed. I'm offering those for $2 a packet. You'll be able to get a measured amount. See this little thing here? This is very handy for seed saving. This is a little measure that you'll get when you buy iron chelates. And I never throw these away, because that's really good for giving everybody an equal measure of seed in my packet. So you'll either get one of that or one of that according to the size of the seed that you've got. How long does the vitality of seed last out of the fridge? Well, look, that's my problem. Now these are in packets and they're at atmospheric temperature and humidity. The clock is ticking. And I would like to really get rid of these seed during the cool seasons before the weather warms up and the humidity increases, because that is always the risk with packets of seed that aren't sealed. There was a time when we used hermetically sealed packets in the Seed Savers network, but they're incredibly laborious to put together and they're very expensive to do. So the best thing is to put the seed into the fridge, refer to your Seed Savers manual as for the general lifespan of seed that will be stored in a fridge, and work on that basis. Always write on the side of the bottle when you save the seed. One other thing which will improve the vitality of seed, I've got all these little bits of, this is calcium chloride, which you find in vitamin bottles, medicine bottles. Everybody in the ABC that comes up here to film with me, they all keep their little calcium chloride sachets, and I've got a little store of those. You can dry them out in a herb dryer, which is a very simple device for drying seed and and for redrying these, and they last forever. And they suck the moisture out of a packet or out of a jar, and they help to keep the seed viable for longer. Should all types of seed be stored in the fridge? Well, look, I did mention earlier on that certain types of seed, and this pandanus is one example, this palm seed is another example. These are not compatible with drying out or chilling. So those are the sort of things that you basically have to grow. In the case of this palm seed, it has to have the kernel cracked. Otherwise, it might take 7 years before this Chilean wine palm seed will germinate. And frankly, I'm not going to live long enough to wait for seven years for seed to germinate. So I crack the seed off, the kernel off, and put the seed in and germinate them in about 6 months to a year. In terms of pandanus seed, well, look, they take about 6 months to a year to germinate. What I do is I just chuck them out underneath a shrub and let nature take its course. They germinate quite happily outside in the garden. There's a whole range, basically, of times that seed will be able to be saved. The longest I've ever personally kept seed in my seed store is teosinte, which is an extinct wild variety of corn. And I kept that in my seed bank for 10 years. Then I grew it on in my garden, produced another set of seed, and then put that back into the bank, and I repeat that process. One of the things that I do when I'm doing my seasonal review of my seed store, and I'm checking for the time when I should be sowing them, and in the case of this pigeon pea seed here, what I do is I'll get 100 seed out, or maybe 10 seed if you don't have so much, sow them, and work out what the percentage germination rate is. And if you get less than 5 out of 10 or 50% out of 100 seed, then you really need to grow the seed, produce fresh seed, and then rebank it. The germination rate is a good guide to the viability of the seed that you're storing. Can we adapt coriander to grow better in our warmer climate and not bolt? I love this question. Now look, I do have a public Facebook page, and I do post about coriander every now and then. One of the things about coriander seed is that you can get slow bolt coriander seed, and in Brisbane that will extend the useful picking season of your coriander by about a fortnight, so not much. For me, the value of coriander is when it's actually blooming. It sounds a bit perverse, but if you're going to step into my world as an organic gardener is avoiding spraying as much as I can. Now, coriander is brilliant for bringing in pollinators and parasites, okay? One of the best predators that coriander brings into my garden are hoverflies. I have about 8 species of hoverfly in my garden. And when the adults have finished drinking nectar, once they've filled their bellies, the next thing they want to do is to make babies. And for that, they need a plant which is crawling with aphids. They'll lay their eggs there, their babies hatch, they eat live aphids, and they control viruses in the garden. So put that all together, I welcome coriander when it flowers in my garden because it's actually doing its real thing. The only thing that I do is I remove a few leaves every now and then to have some coriander myself, but essentially I use coriander as a welcome weed. If I have a bare patch in my garden, I'll sow some seed, I'll scatter some seed around there and I'll use it. And of course, coriander is a spice, and I always put a few seed into a curry. So what I'm really saying is don't focus too much on the short lifespan of coriander. Get in sync with coriander. When it starts to go up to flower, that's your cue to sow more seed. When it flowers, that is when it's working hardest to protect your garden from viruses spread by sap-sucking pests like aphids. And it's also a reminder that not too long in the future, you will have seed which you can use either as spice or you can save it at home. So that's a very long-winded answer, but that's how I integrate things and seed saving into my garden. So that is a flower which I use for pest control and control of viruses. So it's disease suppression and pest control when it's flowering. I welcome it. No other questions coming through?
No other questions, Jerry, and thank you so much. We're almost out of time. I just wanted to say, I'm going to share the screen in a moment and just give you Jerry's contact details for his website, and also the Seed Savers Association, where you can pick up those books. Remembering you can download them as PDFs for free. And then also there's your Facebook page, Jerry, as well. So please seek Jerry out on Facebook and like and follow him. I think you mentioned that you were featured in 109 countries, and you said your stats on answering questions via Facebook were usually 10,000 questions each year, and that doubled in the last few weeks.
It's just gone completely crazy. I feel guilty if I don't check my phone for messages every half an hour. I'm feeling guilt already.
So you've not been housebound and bored for sure.
I'm never bored at home. Never. I never have enough time to do what I do. It would be nice, however, to be able to get out and meet other people. But that's the way things are currently. But I'm coping very well. Don't feel sorry for me.
So I've just put up on the screen. You should see that I've shared Jerry's details on the screen for his website, and those handbooks he spoke about. Look, that's just been a fabulous session. And I think, you know, you've given us a lot of information. You've got a great presentation style. Just want to thank everybody who's participated and also donated to our Green Gold Coast charities. You've kept, that's really, really informative. Would love to see more of you. I had something else I wanted to ask you, but that's just escaping. That's right, sorry, your seeds. Everybody who's attended today, we've got your email details. We've got a list of Jerry's packets of seed available. We're going to email those to you. So you can contact Jerry directly and buy some seeds from him. And that makes a lot of sense. And for all of those keen gardeners like myself, we know how difficult it's been to get seeds from our conventional sources just in the last few weeks. It would be lovely if that's the sign of things to follow as more and more gardeners take interest in gardening and producing their own vegetables and produce in the garden. So thank you very much, Jerry, for your time today. I really, really appreciate it. Lovely session. I'm sure we've all learned a lot, and we look forward to connecting with you in the future. Please visit our Botanical Bazaar Facebook page as well for news of our Garden Expo coming up this year. We haven't got the date confirmed, obviously, for social distancing reasons and being sensible, but we really look forward to seeing full participation again when we do. Thank you for everybody. That concludes today's meeting, and we look forward to seeing more of you, and watch out on our Facebook page for more gardening, virtual gardening workshops. Thank you.
Look forward to seeing you at the Botanical Bazaar. Carry on gardening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kai. Thanks, Jerry. All of those changes get better supported by how we all keep